So I want to show you some night shots that I have taken and explain what I did. This is out in Oregon, and it was really in the middle of nowhere, right? So you could see the stars. And we set up cameras on tripods, and the moon was just about to set. So the moon was lighting the scene. And so moonlight, a lot of people don't know, is a terrific way to light a scene. And that is how you can see all the detail. Now, the sky was taken in a separate photo, and the two of these were put together in Photoshop as a montage. So the moon was setting, and we went out there, and this is a reservoir, and set up our shots, and shot from this point down when the moon was still out. So it gave us some really nice lighting. It was a longer exposure. You can see the water is kind of soft from the movement, because when the moon is out in large bodies of water like this, you do get a small tide effect. And so you could hear the tide coming in and out, the lake tide coming in and out. And so it was moving. And so this what I do when I want these surrealistic night shots is I set my ISO to 100, and I stop my f-stop all the way down to 22 or higher if it will go higher. And then I do a long exposure. And I was able to do a light reading because there was the moon. And then I was able to do a series of shots. And this is manual, right? So I set it on my shutter speed. I'm trying to remember what the shutter speed was. I know that I did f22 and ISO 100, and I did a very long, bulb was my shutter speed, sorry. So I did bulb for my shutter speed. And then I held open the shutter for 2 minutes. And you could say that this is a little overexposed. I think it's perfect, but it's a matter of opinion, right? So for 2 minutes, I held open the shutter because my camera only do, I think, 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and shot this, okay? And then I waited. Now this was done with slide film. Okay. So just to make sure I got it, I did bracket. I shot for a minute and a half, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, just to make sure I had gotten the right exposure. Okay. Because I couldn't see it then. We didn't have digital back then. And then I waited until the moon went down, and then this became dark and you could see the stars. And the stars were very visible. So then what I did was I just opened it, right? So I just opened it up, bulb, and I exposed it for until my battery went out. So it was probably a couple hours of exposing to get the star trails. So my battery just said no more, and it just went out after a couple of hours. And that was all I was able to get of the star trails. So then what I did was, after I processed them, I scanned them. I had a scanner. I used to have a scanner. And then I brought them into Photoshop, and I cropped them so that actually the pretty sky, because what used to happen in Oregon was the sun didn't set until like 11 o'clock. So the pretty sky that you get, the color in the sky here, is actually from the original shot with the moon, because the sun was setting as the moon was setting. And so you got this alpenglow. It's called the alpenglow. And so what I did was, in Photoshop, I brought the long exposure and the moon exposure together, and I put them over each other, and I did some masking. And then I blended these with the, I believe, Lighten filter. And a blending mode, sorry. So I used a blending mode to get the pink sky from this photo on this photo and create this beautiful gradient. And that's what I did. And so this turned out to be a really terrific photo. For me, I think the only thing would have made it better is if, there had been some little subject matter here, like somebody on a boat or something floating. But the problem is, if you knew how big this was, I mean, that might be even that little, those little, yeah, you can see these are massive rocks, massive boulders. So you wouldn't have seen somebody anyway. But nonetheless, this would be, a beautiful shot for a calendar or something like that. And that's how I did it. So by going to a scene and intentionally knowing, we went out there knowing that the moon was going to set and that then it was going to go down, so that we could take advantage of moon set or moon shine, moon for the light, moon as a lighting source, and then blend it with the sky. You could not take this photo just by itself. There was no way, because what would have happened if you had taken this photo long exposure to get the star trails? This all would have been overblown. Even if you had used a polarizer of some sort to make this darker, or worked with this to make this darker, you're still not going to get a long exposure with the moon out, because that light is so bright. So I had to combine these two using the blending modes in Photoshop to get this final shot. Let's look at the next one. Okay, so this was the reason I want to talk about this is this was, you can see the sky maybe an hour after sunset, and it was going to rain. The rain clouds were starting to move in. And I saw this candy store, and it just looked to me like the eyes, like three eyes, the head of a monster, and its mouth was this candy store that was luring children in. And I got down on the ground and looked up at it to make it look more ominous. But the best part was, because the sun had gone completely down far enough, right? So we're now in astronomical twilight here. You could see there's no reflection on the glass. You could see into the candy store. If you had taken this shot earlier, you would have not been able to see from the reflection of the glass. And there's still just a little bit down here left from the car. Light bouncing off the car, still shining in there. But overall, you can see inside, and I exposed for the lighting. I exposed to make sure that the lighting wasn't overblown, and everything else, I let everything else just go from there. If I wanted, I could take this into Photoshop, and I could lighten some of the building a little bit more. But I like that stark contrast. I think it's a candy store, but it's ominous looking. And I just realized that whatever that is looks like a rock. Oh, well, I know what it is. It's the downspout. No, what is that? I don't know. Anyway, I would go back in, and you could use this area to Photoshop this out. I would totally select and get rid of that. That shouldn't be in the scene. And another thing I might do is come over here. You see there's some balloons. I didn't realize that when I took the picture, actually, but I might I kind of like the idea that maybe there's a clown hanging out over there. So I might lighten this. This wasn't at night, but it was inside a building, inside a train car, and it just was very dark. So it's a low lighting situation. And I I set up the tripod to shoot through so I could see through the window. And I had to do a long exposure on this to get the metal to glow. And what I exposed for, actually, because for me, I was framing, I wanted everything in here to be a frame for looking out the window, because you can sort of see this silhouette inside the car. And, there's this caution tape that says crime scene. I think one of the things I would do is go in and use the dodge tool to lighten that a little bit, to make that a little more prominent. But my idea was that this was to what I wanted people to really be able to see, that shadow inside there. But also you can see the beautiful highlights. And so this is probably a few seconds. I don't remember what I used for this. I always try to shoot low ISO if possible, and I did. And because I wanted everything to be in focus, I shot at f16. I don't remember the length of time that it took to expose. I don't remember the shutter speed, but it was probably 30 seconds or a minute. Also tripod, and I wanted to expose for this, so that is where I spot metered in the sky and exposed for this area, and then let everything else just fall from there. The idea was to create a mood scene. You can see the wood, you can see the color on the water. I thought there was one with a boat in here, guy on a boat, and just this serene shot where the high contrast but dark image. This was the same lake, different area of the lake earlier in the morning, and definitely on a tripod, and I overexposed it because I wanted the sky to be pastel and soft, and so this was a longer exposure. So that's why I highly recommend that you do multiple exposures in terms of bracketing. Shoot under, shoot over. And if you can set your camera to do that, when you set it to do that, it will automatically take the shot for you when you press the shutter. Silhouettes are another really great thing to do at night or low lighting. The sun had set. This was probably 45 minutes after the sun had set, 30 minutes after the sun had set, because you still have these yellows and oranges, and the sun had caught the clouds. But I had this silhouette of the people. So what ended up happening was I had to have I opened it up. I used F4 because everything was so far away from me that everything was going to be in focus if I set it on infinity. So I did that. So I wanted to capture the people as the silhouette, and I wanted to stop the water. This was the ocean. This was, I'm trying to remember what this was. This was Florida, I believe. And yeah, this is Florida. But what ends up happening is the clouds move. So you get this blurring of the clouds because they were moving. And that's the thing you have to decide. Do I want the people frozen in time, or do I want the clouds perfect? And in this case, because it was just these beautiful streaks of color, and I really wanted the people in focus. I mean, the people in focus. I focused on that, on having them in, or I used a shutter speed to get them in perfect freeze frame. And exposure on this to get them dark. I wanted the silhouette was on the water. Okay, so this was looking into an open car, and it has some stuff in it, and out. And when I was on this side, the sun was behind me. But when I was on this side, the sun was coming in, and I was using the sun. The sun was setting. I was using the sun to light into the dark space. And one of the things you could do is, if you didn't have anything like that, you could put a light over here looking in to light this up. So there's a lot of things you can do to light up dark spaces. This was a light sculpture, and I took this picture of the moon separately. I exposed, the first shot I took, I exposed here and made this in focus, but I exposed for this to get the overall picture. And then I went in and I exposed on the moon. I spot metered the moon, and I shot the moon, and all of this was too dark. But then I came in and I cropped out the moon and put the moon in over where the moon was on this photo, and used a blending mode to darken. And here we go. And so now you have this really cool sculpture garden with the moon in focus.